So, after playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, the one thing I did not expect out of Rebirth was for it to cut any content. To my shock, Rocket Town is nowhere to be found on the world map, and Cid has had his entire backstory and personality seemingly retconned. So let's take a look at this new interpretation of everyone's favourite foul-mouthed pilot, or in this case, former foul-mouthed pilot, and see what they're planning to do for his character arc in Part 3. Let's start with his personality. In the original game, Cid was a salty and sweary grease monkey ace pilot with a heart of gold, which is a somewhat stereotypical assortment of character tropes. However, it worked because he had a more profound goal, going to space. Of course, his chance to go into space is foiled because his assistant would have died in an accident if he had launched the rocket, and he hates her for it, becoming verbally abusive towards her. I think this contributed to Cid's relative unpopularity in Final Fantasy VII. This is still one of the best JRPG parties out there, but I feel like Cid is by far the least liked and talked about member, which says a lot because there are two optional party members, one of which doesn't get any character development outside of a side quest. It's unfair that Cid blames his assistant Shira for a mistake that would have been some worker or even his fault, and he pushes his bitterness out onto her. I get that every character needs to have flaws to overcome, but this is a step too real for Final Fantasy. In Rebirth, Cid is a pilot for hire who loses all his gruffness. Hell, he's voiced by the guy who does Tenya Ida in My Hero Academia and Erwin Smith in Attack on Titan. They're clearly not going for a hardened, bitter man who's lost his dream. What's more is that the developers have added another personal relationship between him and Aerith's mother, which is them trying to make him more sympathetic and caring, offering to help the party on their quest out of the goodness of his heart. And the whole time I'm just there thinking, this is not the Cid I remember. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those weirdos who think that if even a single line is changed from the source material, then it ruins the adaptation. But this is a huge departure from the grizzled Shinra veteran from 1997, so I found myself wondering, if this remake trilogy is supposed to be the ultimate realization of what Final Fantasy VII could have been, then why have they changed one of its characters so significantly? It's almost inarguable that this is one of the largest departures from the original game's story outside of Sephiroth. So what's the reason behind it? Well, I think I laid it out earlier in the video. Cid's just not that popular. Think about it. Final Fantasy VII introduces this crazy party of a dude with a minigun for an arm, a fortune-telling robot, a ninja, and a lion. Then when you're so deep into the game, you can't wait to see what the next wacky companion to join is, and it's just some grouchy middle-aged man, only this one doesn't have a minigun. It's a bit of a letdown. And then he's immediately overshadowed by the goddamn revolver-wielding vampire, and everyone just forgets about him. Don't get me wrong, he's still more popular than anyone in Final Fantasy XIII, but within his own game, he's rather bland. Not to mention, with this modern adaptation, an abusive man yelling at a woman who he blames for something that wasn't her fault wouldn't sit well with today's audience, especially if they had to hear the yelling rather than just read it. Also, if you're going to do Cid properly with voice acting, you can't censor his swearing, and that would most likely get the age rating bumped up a bit. So I think they made Cid a more mellow character because they weren't happy with the legacy he left behind after being in one of the most highly regarded RPGs of all time, and they're trying to rectify that by changing the character. I love this. Part of a remake is removing the things that don't work, something Resident Evil has seen great success with recently. It shows that Square isn't trying to recapture Final Fantasy VII, but surpass it. I can't judge and compare the two Cids because we haven't seen his character arc yet, and one of the more powerful moments of the original game is the Cid arc. Long story short, Cid does get to go into space and achieve his dream, and this moment holds significant weight not just for him, but the game as a whole. Even though he's riding high because he achieved his dream, this is also important because it's the first time we get to see the planet in its entirety. We look down at the rock we're fighting so diligently to save, and it really resonates with the player. With Rocket Town missing from its usual place, it makes me wonder if it's just been shunted to the sequel or cut entirely. I can't imagine this moment not been in a gorgeous pre-rendered cutscene, as the impactfulness of seeing the planet can't be understated. But Cid has no intention of going to space, so it would be weird if he just randomly mentioned it as we walked up to Rocket Town. While I have no doubt that Cid is going to have an entire chapter dedicated to him as every other party member has so far, I can't help but wonder how much it will have been changed from its original state. If you want to see a video on another Final Fantasy Cid, check out this character essay on the Final Fantasy XVI interpretation, and I'll see you in another 2 days.